FLM, wide open thinking, world-class work, and far-reaching results. Now with locations in Minneapolis, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Washington, D.C. A strategic marketing and communications company dedicated to serving clients who specialize in the business of agriculture and the life of rural communities.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C., or perhaps more aptly we should say as the date that we're recording, maybe the last week and a half. You may notice that we're coming to you a little bit later than usual here at agripulse.com. Reason being, there were some really late votes that happened last week, particularly in the Senate, and so we wanted to make sure that we had all of the information to summarize before we tried to summarize the week. And so recording this here on a Monday with the Congress out of town, cleared a CR and WRDA here before they jetted out. So Phil, with that CR, that funds the government through April. But interestingly enough, they're going to have to come up with some kind of funding mechanism in April. So they're going to have to finish out FY17 as they're doing appropriations bills for FY18 at the same time.
Yeah, boy, they've got a lot of work. They come back, the new Congress, 115th Congress, starts on January the 3rd, and man, do they have a full plate. Yeah, this went down to the wire, and the reason we had to sort of postpone, I knew where things were headed, but you know, with Congress and the Senate, you never know exactly how things are going to come out. And so the continuing resolution that was funding the government expired at midnight on Friday. And of course, the Senate went to about 11 o'clock. Shortly before 11 o'clock, they approved a new continuing resolution to, as you say, to fund the government through April. Basically, the Senate told the House, we need through April in order to get the rest of the fiscal year, fiscal 17, funded. So yeah, they're going to have that on their plate very much, along with everything else, tax reform, repealing the Affordable Care Act, and infrastructure, all sorts of big pieces of legislation on the to-do list for the Trump administration and the new Congress coming in January. And
that showdown having a lot to do with some key Senate Democrats kind of threatening a filibuster over some benefits for coal miners, but that seems to be water under the bridge at this point. The Senate passed the CR, they're out of town, off for their holiday break, and so they'll be back in town in January. But another thing that they passed in addition to a continuing resolution was a bill that we've been following at Agri-Pulse for quite a while, the WRDA bill. I believe the technical term was the WIN Act in this particular go-around. But Phil, a lot of water infrastructure funding in this bill, but also some key provisions here that really got interesting there for a little bit relating to the California drought.
Yeah, it was quite interesting watching the California delegation, and particularly California's two senators who just split entirely different directions on this. Of course, we've all been talking in agriculture about the drought in California. It's been going on for year after year. There's been tremendous pressure from the farmers in the Central Valley there to get more irrigation water. The irrigation flows are limited. A major reason is because of endangered species productions for the salmon and the species called the Delta smelt. Right at the last minute, last week, just a few days before the Congress is about to leave, the House Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, who's from Bakersfield, and Senator Dianne Feinstein announced an agreement that they had to put provisions in this water resources bill to basically, bottom line is to increase water flows into the Central Valley from farther up north. Senator Barbara Boxer, who was retiring, staged something of a filibuster on Friday. She took to the floor, but she ultimately didn't have a whole lot of leverage, especially since she's not going to be around. It's pretty hard for a senator who's leaving to exact much revenge if they don't get what they want. So she was leaving, and finally the Senate passed the bill with the drought provisions intact. About 1 o'clock, roughly 1 o'clock in the morning here on the East Coast, and that was it for the 114th Congress.
So the 114th Congress closes out by passing that CR and that WRDA bill. A lot of ag folks in particular really paid close attention to the WRDA bill because of the water infrastructure funding, the things for locks and dams, the inland waterway system, things of that nature. So a lot of cheering from some very midnight hour press releases that were sent out after that vote in early Saturday morning. So 114th Congress officially in the books, looking ahead to the 115th now, as well as some confirmation hearings at that 115th Congress will have to have for the Trump administration. And we saw a couple of appointments here in the last week, and one in particular key to agriculture, that being EPA Administrator EPA Administrator nominee Scott Pruitt, who is currently the Attorney General for the state of Oklahoma. This is an Attorney General that has led the fights and certainly participated in the fights he didn't lead in a lot of EPA regulations, waters of the U.S. in particular. And Phil also got a fair amount of biofuels lobbyists kind of nervous with this appointment.
Yeah, well, it's hard to tell. He's been critical of the RFS. He's been supportive of holding down the annual volume requirements, RVOs, mandates. So yeah, a lot of reason for supporters of ethanol, corn, and growers in particular to be a little bit nervous, because he's not a big fan of the RFS, and as EPA administrator he would administer the RFS and decide those targets on an annual basis going forward. I think it's also important to recognize that he is from Oklahoma. Oklahoma is not a big ethanol state. It is an oil and gas state, and he was in many ways representing the interest of oil and gas as Attorney General of Oklahoma. So we'll have to wait and see. We could see some shift, and it depends on how much the White House, the president, tries to tilt things. But it's not probably the best scenario for if you're in the ethanol business or you're depending on the ethanol usage.
Because they still have a president-elect that was very pro-ethanol throughout the campaign. Very pro-ethanol, very pro-RFS. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of meshes with Scott Pruitt at EPA.
But as you know, Scott, it's one thing to say you're for the RFS. It's an entirely different thing to say what those numbers should be each year. How far are you going to push those numbers? Are you going to keep them at the lowest possible level, or are you going to push them higher, which is exactly what this EPA did just this last month that you've been writing about. And the industry really, on the biofuels industry, really liked that because they pushed, EPA pushed, actually set this up for the Trump administration to some extent, because they pushed. We'll never know what they would have done if Clinton would have won the election, but they pushed it. EPA pushed those numbers higher.
And so we'll get a better idea of what the Trump administration is going to want to do with the RFS late next spring, early next summer, at some point in there when we see their proposed RVOs for 18. But I think that's going to about do it for this edition of the Washington Week in Review. Still no news on an agriculture secretary. If you're keeping score at home, President Barack Obama, or President-elect Barack Obama, tapped Tom Vilsack on December the 17th. So he's got until Saturday, the Trump administration does, if he wants to meet or beat the Obama administration's timeline for an ag secretary. So something to watch there as well in the next week or two is what the Trump transition team does in terms of an agriculture secretary. But we will be sure to keep you apprised of that news. But this is going to be the last Week in Review video that we're going to have here in the calendar year of 2016, as Congress is out of town and now getting ready for the 115th. So appreciate your patronage and viewership this year. Whatever you're planning on celebrating this holiday season, we at Agri-Pulse hope that you enjoy it with people that you care about. I know Phil and I are both looking forward to spending Christmas with our respective families, and we hope you enjoy yourselves this holiday season as well. For Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.